So, it's finally here. Disney's Percy Jackson and the Olympians has just had its season premiere, and overall, I think it's good. It's not perfect, and I will address my criticisms of the show so far. But in terms of the show being a good adaptation of the books, yes, it's very faithful. And one thing I will say about the first 2 episodes is that it did put to rest my fears and concerns I had with the show, mainly the fact that it might feel a bit too watered down and a bit too babyish. And that mainly stemmed from the fact that the show decided to de-age the kids back to their book counterparts of them being 12 years old, unlike in the Christopher Columbus Lightning Thief film where they were like 16. And for the most part, the show has squashed that concern. I think so far the show is really good. I'm enjoying the characters, I'm enjoying the world building. It is nice seeing the scenes I've read being brought to life. Tonally, it feels more like the Percy Jackson books. I mean, right from the get-go, the show opens, and it pretty much opens with the opening narration from Percy from the book. It might be word for word, but if not, it is pretty damn close. Also, I'd say like 95% of the cast are really good. Walker Scobell is perfect as Percy. I knew he was going to be great as Percy, but seeing him in those first 2 episodes, I was like, yeah, that is Percy Jackson. He doesn't have the dark hair, but whatever. Characterization-wise, he is Percy Jackson. Aryan Samadri as Grover is really good. He's a very good representation of the more shy and timid version of the character we see from the books, unlike the weird jock-like character we get with Brandon T. Jackson in the original films, which, don't get me wrong, I like Brandon T. Jackson's Grover, but realistically, that isn't the character from the book. And also, from what we've seen so far, Leah Jeffries as Annabeth is really good. The show hints at the early seeds of Percy and Annabeth's friendship, relationship, connection. It also has like the superficial things, like she has her Yankees cap that makes her go invisible and stuff. I don't actually know why that wasn't in the original films. Like, that's a cool magical item, and you'd have thought that it would have been in the film. The relationship with Percy and his mother is done really well. I really like the connection. When she disappears, you feel it.
Hold fast. Brave the storm.
Unlike in the Lightning Thief film where Percy's mum disappears, Percy's all like, oh no, he gets knocked out, he wakes up in the infirmary and he's just like, oh no, that really happened? My mom is gone? This is no shade to Logan Lerman as a performer, he's fantastic. It's just the way that scene is directed in the original film is hilarious. He's all just like, oh man, did that really happen? Oh no. Like, geez Percy, be a tiny bit more upset that your mum has just disappeared. Now, whilst I do think overall the show is pretty solid so far, I do have some problems with it, and I do think a majority of my problems comes down to the technical aspects, to the directing, because I'm not gonna lie, there are some moments in the show that are really awkwardly directed. For example, the scene where Percy kills Mrs. Dodds with Riptide at the museum. That scene in the show is so awkwardly directed. It's so bafflingly weird. I get the intent behind it. It's supposed to put us in Percy's mindset, his confused mindset. Is Mrs. Dodds real? Was Mrs. Dodds really a Fury? Did that really happen? But the way it comes across on screen, not only is it just massively rushed, but also the way the scene is directed and the way it comes across and the way it plays out, it feels like one of those cheap video game cutscenes where the developers didn't have enough money to actually animate the cutscene, so they ended up doing this weird sort of like still crossfade effect. It's so weird, especially when you consider the fact that the episode is called I Accidentally Vaporized My Pre-Algebra Teacher. Like, that's the name of the chapter from the book, but also, if that's the name of the title of your episode, you might want to focus on that just a tiny bit more. Like in the book, when Percy pushes Nancy Boba Fett into the fountain, Mrs. Dodd takes Percy into a separate room and then she tries to attack him, and then Mr. Brunner comes in and then throws Percy Riptide and such. But in the show, it's like Percy just has Riptide because Mr. Brunner gave him the pen. Percy pushes Nancy into the fountain, and I'm not gonna lie, that effect looked kind of dodgy. And then just out of the blue, Mrs. Dodds just becomes the Fury in broad daylight in front of all these people, and then Percy stabs her, and the way it's directed is just, it's so weird and I didn't like it. Another issue I'll say is Gabe. I didn't really like the actor that portrayed Gabe. I didn't like the show's characterization of Gabe. Yes, Gabe in the books is a schlubby loser, but in the show, he's too almost normal. Like, there isn't a dark streak in him where I can buy that this is the guy that would abuse Sally Jackson. I can't imagine this version of Gabe raising his hand towards Sally Jackson. I don't see it at all. He's just a guy who lazes around on his chair playing online poker. Also, why do they have to make it online poker? Like, isn't the whole point that Gabe has, like, a posse of guys that hangs out at the house, and then, like, you know, Sally makes them bean dip and nachos and stuff? This is where I'm going to give credit to the original film, because Gabe in that film, I bought as an abusive stepfather. I could see him being animus towards Percy. In the show, he just comes across as, like, this guy that doesn't get along with Percy and tries to belittle him. He comes across like the annoying, weird uncle in a sitcom. The way the actor delivered half of his lines, I couldn't tell if he wanted me to laugh by the end of the sentence. I just didn't buy it. he didn't feel like the character from the book, nor did he come across as a threatening presence. Because yes, whilst there are some moments in the books that require levity with Gabe, for the most part, Gabe is a scumbag. Another one of these awkwardly directed scenes was in episode 2, where Clarice tries to give Percy a swirly, but then Percy, obviously because he's the son of Poseidon, controls the water, and the water shoots up and hits the daughters of Ares. The way it was directed was so weird. They all get squirted with the water, and then they kind of just awkwardly stare at Percy, kind of blankly, and then Clarice just goes, "Ah!" and then runs out, and it's like, wait, what? There should have been more screaming from the daughters of Ares, but also Clarice should have been like, "You're dead, Jackson!" and then scream. It's just, it was so weird. And it wasn't like the director shot the scene to make it feel kind of like an awkward comedic moment. They do just kind of just blankly stare at Percy, and then they just wait, and then they continue to stare at Percy, and then they cut, and then Clarice is just like, "Ah!" and then leaves the room. And now moving on to a section I like to call
little nitpicks that don't really matter, but they matter to me because of personal preference.
Why was the Minotaur wearing tighty whities? Like, just... why? It was such a weird and baffling choice. Like, give him a loincloth. Why is he wearing tighty whities? Like, huh? The design of Riptide in pen form didn't really do it for me. It was a ballpoint pen, but it was a very generic looking ballpoint pen. Or at least that's what it looked like. Maybe when you look at the prop pen up close, it has a very Greek-inspired celestial bronze design. But from what I could tell, it just looked like a very generic looking biro. And just to be even more nitpicky, I know in the books, Riptide is a ballpoint pen that you take the cap off of, and then when you do so, the blade expands. But I won't lie, I just prefer the clicky pen design from the original films. Because visually, it's just more interesting, it's more slick. All you do is, and then the sword expands. That's cool. The whole, like, taking off the cap and then it... whilst it works fine on the written page and in the show it's fine, the clicky pen is just the cooler aesthetic. Again, it doesn't break the show, it's just a personal preference. Also, in the Capture the Flag battle with Clarice, isn't the whole point that Percy accidentally trips into the water and then gets a power boost and then he's able to snap Clarice's spear? In the show, Percy just kind of does it, and it's like, wait, isn't the whole point that he's supposed to get a power buff from the water? And speaking of, that moment where Poseidon claims Percy and the visual image of the Triton appears above his head, that visual effect looked awful. Like, it just looked like they just got an image of a trident and then stuck it above his head and added like a glowy effect. Like, isn't the whole point that it's supposed to be like this kind of like magical, glittery, semi-transparent, translucent glow type of thing? Also, the way Percy and Luke meet in the show is a bit weird. Like, isn't the whole point that Percy and Luke bond straight away? But in the show, it's like, they talk to each other and Luke's like, "Oh, sorry about your mum." And Percy's like, "Thanks." And then a couple of scenes go by and then they become buddy-buddy. But at least from what I remember, isn't the whole point that Luke and Percy become buddy-buddy fairly quickly? It's like, "Oh, sorry about your mum." And then they continue talking and then, like, they bond really quickly. In the show, it takes a couple of scenes before I buy that they have some semblance of a friendship. But it's like, should have happened a bit quicker. I bought Luke and Percy's initial friendship in the film more than I did in the show. I'm not saying the show did it poorly, I'm just saying the show took more time for me to get invested in Percy and Luke's relationship than in the film. In the film, it felt like a quick, natural moment of camaraderie. In the show, it felt like, okay, couple of scenes have to go by, okay, now they get along. But other than that, I think so far, those are really my only real nitpicks and problems with the show. As of right now, I think the show is pretty good. It's not perfect, but it is a nice representation of the Percy Jackson books. It's nice to see the stuff from the books come to life on the screen. And I just hope that the show continues the same level of quality, because so far, I'm giving it a thumbs up, I'm enjoying it. Don't get me wrong, it's not like it's a television masterpiece or anything, but it's good, it's enjoyable, it's fun. I will be back when the season wraps up, and I'll do my season-long review, but so far, I'm enjoying Percy Jackson the Olympians. I think it's good. Whilst I have my own personal nitpicks and problems as a book fan, as a filmmaker, I think so far the show is good. It's light, it's fluffy, it's good for young kids to enjoy. It's nice to see kids being exposed to Percy Jackson in this new format, and hopefully it expands the fan base. More people get involved in the Percy Jackson fandom. They understand the reason why these books are so beloved. And so, yeah, I just hope the show continues and we get more. We get all of the main series and then we get to Heroes of Olympus and such. Those are just my thoughts about the premiere episodes of Percy Jackson. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow on social media, all the good stuff. Until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.